Hello everyone, welcome back to Rolling Solo. My name is Adam Smith, and today we're going to be playing through Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea, or at least starting the solo playthrough for this particular game. Now, we're going to go through a little bit of the setup. What I want to do before we start off is kind of give you an overview of how we got to where we are right now, because normally I would have time in order to do a full solo setup video, rules overview, all that good stuff. The great news is that my Uncle Rodney did a fantastic, and this is my Uncle Rodney from Watch and Play, did a fantastic Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea setup video. So there's no reason for me to go through all that again because it's already been done so well. So if you want to find out how to set up Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea, at least even for a multiplayer game, which comes very close to what you'd expect the board to look like in solo play, then check that video out. I'll put a link in the description below, which will direct you right to that particular video. You can watch that before you start this one. What I'm hoping to do at the beginning of this video is show you essentially what tweaks are made in order to allow for solo play. So at least you understand what differences come into play when you're going to go down that road. Now I'm going to be playing, just as a quick overview, I'm going to be playing myself as the elves, which I've set up on this side of the table, and then on the far left-hand side of the table, I've got two enemy factions which are going to be controlled by Autumn. I've got the orcs as well as the dwarves, and their armies are all set up around them. So I'm going to talk more about how their boards are set up and how everything's positioned, or starts at least. But for now, I just want to give you an idea of the factions involved. Typically, or actually always, when you're playing with three factions, you usually leave one extra continent, because these are considered continents. There's 4 of them. You leave one continent always in addition, filled with exploration tokens, an extra one for every total player count. So for instance, if we're playing with 3 total players, technically it's elves, dwarves, and orcs, then we still would actually fill all 4 continents. If we were playing just myself as the elves against a solo controlled orcs, then we would technically fill just 2 continents and then an extra one, which would be 3. So it's always just one additional filled out with exploration tokens based on the total number of players or even solo control players in the game. So that's something to keep note of. Because I'm using technically 3 factions in this, then all the continents are going to have exploration tokens. So this is going to feel like a full-blown game, even though we're not having 4 factions. So this is going to be really fun. So without further ado, what we're going to do is get right into the solo setup of this, which will help you understand the differences between setting up for multiplayer versus setting up for solo play. Alright, so what you're seeing here in front of you is the orc faction. Now, I'm not going to jump too much between the orc faction and the dwarves during this talk about the differences in setting up solo, because once you learn how to set up one of the factions in solo play, then the other one's going to follow the exact same mindset, so there's no point in bouncing back and forth. I'm going to focus on the orcs for you guys. So of course the most important thing is just getting your board in play. We're going to talk about how you actually get everything set up, because these boards are double-sided. Now you can see over here I'm using the elves, and the look and feel of the particular game board is much different than what you just saw over there. That's because if it's a human control player, this is the side that you play on. If you're playing with a solo controlled or solo enemy faction, you'll see solo enemy up here underneath that faction's name. And then this mat is going to design and layout, and how it's actually handled is completely different. So we'll be talking about how that works, and I'll show you that during the actual gameplay. But first off, I just want to talk to you a little bit about the overview of what's going on when you're playing against solo controlled or automa controlled units. So essentially in this variant, this solo play variant, you go head-to-head against AI-controlled factions. Well, in this case, factions for me, because I'm going to be going up against not only the orcs, but as well as the dwarves, which will give me just as much punishment, I'm sure. The enemy is going to control 3 armies each. So each faction is going to have 3 armies being controlled, and each one of them is going to be led by a hero. These heroes are shown right here. So there's 3 major heroes. These ones happen to be painted. So there's 3 for the orcs and 3 over here for the dwarves. So essentially what's going to happen in a run of a turn, high level, is there is a deck of solo cards which come inside the game. You're going to use that solo deck with a particular faction. You can also go on Board Game Geek, where they've released the deck so you can print it off in order to have more factions basically join you in your siege. Of course, you want them to be behaving differently and not using the same deck, so each one can have its own deck. That gives you a little bit dynamic play, so that you have a lot of randomization happening with what the different heroes are going to do. These cards are going to give you pass and fail type objectives, so they're going to tell you to build, recruit, those type of things. And when they're actually pulled up and in play, you'll see this during the playthrough, they'll be placed right here in these particular columns, and they associate themselves with a hero, which is what I just mentioned in terms of each faction having 3 heroes. So when a card comes off this deck, it's going to land, the first one's going to land here, and it's going to actually impact this particular hero based on where he is on the board. And we'll talk more about how that kind of interplays with everything, but essentially you can see that in a typical round, the solo-controlled faction is going to have 3 turns before the round ends. We, as the human control player, so for the elves, are going to stick with our normal 2. So if you play this game multiplayer or with other human players, you're going to go ahead and always be used to the fact that you can only make 2 regular actions, unless of course you're following. That's a whole other conversation, which we'll see during gameplay, but typically you only have 2 actions to spend before the round ends. You can use follow actions in this particular solo variant, so yes, you can potentially increase the amount of times that you go in your turn, and that's going to help you. That's part of the strategy of trying to fight off these guys. I'm not going to get into the strategy of that just yet, but I want to make mention of those facts up front. So the very first thing you're going to do is, of course, which I already mentioned earlier, make sure that your board that you've chosen is on the solo side. That's the first step for setting up solo play. So the orcs are on the solo side of the faction mat. That's good. You're then going to gather all your faction's components. So that's going to be their heroes, all of their miniatures, all their towers, all their vessels, which is land, air, and sea. So you're going to have a bunch of them. All just keep them close by. You don't have to organize them in any particular pattern, but as I mentioned, there's many setup videos which show you where you can potentially put them, but the mats are designed a little differently in solo play, so I typically just put them off the side, categorized easily within reach. Second step, you're going to gather that faction's components in terms of the solo cards. So these are going to be the solo enemy action cards here that you got rid of here. So I put them up here. I've shuffled them. I don't know what order they're in. Of course, when this is actually played through, you're going to play through this deck until there's 1 card left. When there's 1 card left to pull, you then, before pulling that card, are going to shuffle the entire deck back in and then draw some more. The reason for that is because by the time you get to that last card, if you've memorized the deck, which is only 8 cards deep, you're going to have an advantage knowing exactly what that 8th card would be. So by putting it back into the deck, you're essentially, or by reshuffling the entire deck, you're essentially kind of refreshing the deck and having no idea what's going to come next. Keeps the game fresh and keeps you from knowing a little bit too much. So there is a little bit of a strategy there in knowing the cards as well as knowing what has been pulled already. So that you can use that to your advantage, but once it gets down that last card, you cannot use that to your advantage or will not be able to. So once you've got that set up, then you're going to disregard any hero cards. So normally, there's these hero cards that come into play if you're potentially playing on the human side of things. So for me, for instance, I'm the elves, so I get, every hero is going to have a card like this. You're going to ignore these cards when you're playing solo for the orcs. So you're not going to have to pull those out of the box. You don't have to worry about them at all. You can completely ignore those and leave those aside. Also, all the abilities for everything that you need is on this mat. So that's it. You don't need anything else. Keeps things nice and clean. So you're going to go ahead and place 3 hero units, and these hero units are not going to actually rest right here, although I put them here to start. You're going to actually put them up into the courtyard area. So it says enemy heroes start here and return when they are killed. So that includes your heroes, so everything and serfs, they're all going to end up here. So as of right now to start the game, all those heroes will go up there. We're going to be doing the exact same thing with the dwarves. I'll just move them now just for the fun of it. So they're all up there. So now everything is in the correct area. Do not place 2 serfs and 1 warrior into the courtyard. So the solo enemies do not get a warrior and 2 serfs like we will when we set up our mat as per normal. So take that into account. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to go grab your resources. You only need 1 token per resource. Once you grab these tokens, you'll see there's a nice little watermark kind of where exactly those tokens should rest on this particular resource track. You're going to make sure that they're in that location, so 3 in this case. You'll also notice that on my board, which I'm not showing in this particular shot, but mine starts at 2, and that's more so normal when playing against human players. The solo side is going to give them 3 to start, giving them a little leg up on production. So after that, you're going to place 1 action token on the start space of the capital city track. So in this particular case, there's this capital city track that runs across the board like this. And this can actually trigger the end game. So there's an end game trigger at the very end, and if these guys can get that to the end, they do trigger the end of the game. So this is going to move across here, and it's going to be a result of a card that can come out of here as a build action that specifically states building up the capital city. So when that happens, not only is it going to move up the track when they spend resources, abilities are going to unlock, and that's how nasty things are going to happen to you. Plus, it can, like I said, trigger the end game. So just make sure you've got 1 tracker per faction in that spot, and it should match exactly the design. It says start, so just make sure it's placed right there, and you'll move it along the track when it makes sense to, and I'll talk more about that during the playthrough. Next, the other action token, because there's 2 of these in the box, you don't need the other one. So there is going to be a second one. Typically you're using that for the second action if you're playing as a human player against other human players. But when you're playing solo, you don't need that second action marker. You can just put it back in the box. Next up after that, you're going to shuffle the solo action cards into a deck and place it face down next to the enemy board. So we've done that. It's right there. It's all shuffled up, good to go. The enemy does not require spell cards. So you're not going to be dealing any cards that are spells to this deck, or to these factions ever. So that's the good news. Again, it's trying to lighten the load on the maintenance of running these turns. And you'll see how quickly these things pick up as you go along. The enemy, as I mentioned, doesn't start with spells, doesn't need them at any point in time, so make sure not to do that. All other faction components are set up in the supply as normal, which I mentioned at the beginning, so everything here should just be in place. After you've placed your own capital city, which is going to be me placing a capital city somewhere on one of the continents, then you choose the enemy's capital city region on an adjacent continent. So basically what's going to happen is it's going to force us to put our capital cities so that the 2 enemies that I'm going up against are going to be directly adjacent to me. So if we go over here to the actual game board, I've already selected that my capital city will sit right here. This just makes it easy because my mat and everything's on this side. But that also means that I have to put the 2 factions that I'm fighting against adjacent to me. And then we're going to leave this one wide open. It'll be filled with exploration tokens as it shows here. Again, the setup video that my uncle did at Watch It Played is a fantastic representation of how to fill this board out with these tokens. So if you want to see how that works, you can check the rulebook, or you can also go to that video. So I've already chosen my capital city by placing this right here. And they're obvious because they're gigantic and shadowed in. Now we just have to choose the orcs and then the dwarves. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the orcs to be exactly next to their board as well, just to keep things easy. And then we're going to take the dwarven tier 1 capital city and we're going to drop it over here. So there we go. We're kind of all set up now. We got capital cities on all angles, and that is the setup. All right, just before we go ahead with the playthrough, I want to mention one thing. You can see it across the top of the box. That is the 4x, or 4 different ways that we can potentially end or trigger the end of the game. That is exploring, expanding, exploiting, or exterminating. So those are the 3 things that we can do in order to complete an X objective. So these are the X objectives laid out. So you can explore, which means all land exploration tokens in the game have been revealed. That's a lot. So land exploration tokens are all these brown ones. Once they're all revealed, that's 1 trigger. Expanding is all of the player's serfs and warriors are in play. So that's just basically getting my entire army and everything out into play, whether it be in the courtyard or just on the game board somewhere. That also triggers the game end and is considered expanding. Exploiting is all 3 of a player's towers are in play. So really you've just dominated the land and able to keep and exploit the land for your own personal gain using towers. And the 4th possible way is exterminating. So a player has destroyed another player's capital city. Obviously, if you take down one of the capital cities, that's going to have an end game trigger attached to it. So those are the 4 different ways that can trigger the end of the game. All right, so I just want to talk quickly about the rounds and how they're going to work so that everyone knows how this is going to progress throughout the playthrough. Now, normally, if you were just playing yourself as a human controlled player against one of the solo controlled enemies, it would just be the solo enemy pulling the first card and going first. Then you would take a turn with an action. Then the solo enemy would be going with the second action. I would then be going with my second action. And then finally, the solo enemy would take the last action. Now, as you notice, if you think about rounds back to back, it's going to be enemy, myself, enemy, myself, enemy. And then going into the next round, it's going to be enemy starting. So they're going to actually have opportunities where they're going to be able to go twice in a row before I get to go. The reason for that is because the enemies cannot follow actions. And if you're not familiar with following, I'll explain it as we go through the playthrough. But essentially following using serfs on my side of things, I can follow some of the cards that the enemy chooses or pulls. So essentially I can gain additional turns that can kind of slip in there if I have serfs available to take advantage of it. And of course, whatever it is I require to do that particular action, whether it be resources and things like that. That's kind of the balancing mechanic in this solo play. So the other thing to make mention of is the fact we're not just playing with a human control player and 1 orc faction. We're playing with the dwarves as well. So really, it's going to be pulling a card for the orcs if we decide the orcs are going first. Then we're going to have the dwarves go with their first card, and then it'll be my turn. And then it'll come back over here. So it's going to become a little bit trickier because it might be good for me because I guess I have more opportunity to follow one of the factions, but I have to do that follow action at the same time simultaneously when that card is pulled, which gets me into tricky situations as to when I should spend serfs to follow. And again, I'll explain what all that means when we get to the playthrough. You'll see it's quite simple, but there's a lot of strategy involved in it. So without further ado, I think we got a general understanding of what's going on, and really I think you guys are just chomping the bit to see me play, so let's get to it. All right, here we go. First pull for the orcs who are going first is recruit. Okay, so let's take a look at the card here. Now, you guys aren't familiar with these cards. I am. I can walk you through this. Basically, the compass, you're going to ignore this unless you fail the main condition of the card. The compass is going to help you to tell you where your hero should go if you happen to fail this whole section. So the first thing you're going to do is read this and see if you can actually do it. If this action fails, which is this above section here, then, and the enemy doesn't have enough resources, that type of thing, then you're going to go to the movement. And again, remember, whenever you pull one of these cards, it's going to go into a slot which then is paired up with a hero. So in this case, this ties into the chieftain. So whatever this is doing ties into the chieftain. In this case, it's recruiting. So if I'm able to spend enough resources to recruit, I will recruit an individual based on this priority list in that chieftain's location. And that's the reason why it's important depending on where this card ends up landing, but you're always going to do it in order. You don't get to pick with these solo controlled factions. So we're going to have the recruit come up here. It says on the card, the enemy pays resources to recruit a unit. The priority order of recruiting is air vessel first, then sea vessel, then a warrior, then a serf. So the first thing they're going to try to do is get the air vessel out. So what we're going to do is take a quick look over here and see how much the air vessel costs. So the air vessel for the orcs is a dragon, and it's going to cost 2 bread and 2 ore, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm going to come over here, and I actually have that, and I guess it's 2 food. I'm calling it bread. I'll probably do that a few times during the playthrough, so forgive me. But I do have those resources, so this can be a successful action. So when it's a successful action, you're going to ignore the bottom section of the card here, and of course you're obviously going to ignore everything about attacking and defending on the bottom as well. I'm just going to spend the resources for this solo faction here, and what it's going to do is it's going to actually create the dragon, which is going to appear in the capital city. Now, it doesn't have to be on top of the capital city. I've put it there because the capital city takes up a decent amount of space around this. Another thing for those of you that aren't familiar with how the game works, the actual land region where your capital city is exactly the same region as your courtyard. So essentially you can think of it as having 3 of your orc heroes are basically on this land. So that's why I put this air unit here, because if it's here or it's there, it's in the same space. This is basically just considered the courtyard of your capital city in general. So it doesn't matter where they're placed that way. So for now, we've now recruited this. It was successful, and because of that, it says a new unit is placed in the region with this enemy hero. It even specifies this on the card in case you're unsure. If it cannot be placed there, it's placed in the capital city. So we've successfully done that action, and there's nothing else that we can do with this particular turn for the enemy, so then we can move on now to the dwarves. All right, so the dwarves are way up here. We're gonna have to stretch real far, and we got ourselves a build. Okay, now these ones are gonna be paper cards because I printed them out. Again, you can find this on BGG if you want to print out multiple decks, because technically you can play this solo with all the factions in the box, and it would be quite insane. So the build here is going to be the capital city track. So this is going to be focusing on that major central portion of the board that I was talking about earlier, which just runs right along here. So they're going to be trying to upgrade their city. And as you can see here, this card will, like the other one, go in the first slot. And it says the enemy pays the red resource to advance its capital city's token level, or token 1 level. So if I'm able to pay that resource cost, then I'm going to try to advance it. If I can, I fail, and then I go to the compass for movement. So what's going to happen here is we're going to take a look, and you'll notice that it actually is a 2. And if you come over here, the dwarves actually do have 2 resources to spend, so they will spend those resources. and now this capital city track is going to go up a space. And because of that, there's actually an ability there that now says that they're going to gain one of those red resources at the end of every round. So that's going to be something to really keep track of, because that's going to be pretty awesome for the dwarves. They're basically really good miners, so they're going to constantly be finding that type of resource and pulling it into their resource pool all the time. So with that said, all of the two, or I should say the first turns for either of those solo controlled factions are now complete, and we can move over to my faction, the elves. The one thing I want to be really clear about is just the names of the actual resources so that it doesn't get confusing. I've been using bread and all these different terminologies for these things. This is considered food. It does look like bread, and it is bread, but it is food. This one right here, the red one, is ore. So that's the reason why earlier we actually said when we upgraded our capital city that the dwarves would then gain ore every single turn, or every single round, I should say, sorry. And that makes thematic sense because dwarves are really good at mining and that type of thing. So they're going to just basically, their capital city has now upgraded to the point of being able to collect more ore. So at the end of every round, their ore is going to be tipping up one, which is kind of dangerous for us, giving them more resources to spend. The green one is mana. Now, I might have called that ore earlier, but I want you guys to know that is considered mana. Now, there's different places on this board that those resources can come from. So obviously, food can come from these locations right here, which are called the plains locations. They're yellow. If you happen to have serfs here, you get double the amount. If you have any units in here at all, or you're controlling it, I should say, which means you just have a unit in there with no enemies inside, you just gain one. Unless there's a serf in one of these spots, then you can gain additional resources and really start gathering. Those resources are all gathered for my squad at the end of my turn, or I should say at the end of the round, sorry. And the solo factions are actually gained when they land and stop their turn or movement in one of those locations, which is why you haven't seen that happen yet. We'll talk more about it when it does. The other locations here are the green ones here, which are forests. They yield the green mana, which is this stuff right here. And then you've got, of course, the mountain regions, which is the ore. So really what we did thematically was the upgrade to the dwarves' capital city allowed them to start mining more often. Now, we're pretty early on in this game already, so the first thing I want to make mention of on my side of things is that I could have followed some actions. I do have, and the solo factions don't have, 2 serfs and a warrior to start. That's an advantage that I have. Now, serfs, what they allow you to do, if you're not familiar, is they allow you to follow a capital action. So if a particular solo faction does a recruit, a build, a research, or a tax action, you can see capital actions can use 1 serf to follow another player's capital action. What that means is, if I wanted to, which I didn't want to do during the first round just because I wanted to show you guys how the cards work on their side first before I start trying to follow them, but basically as a strategy for myself, I can look over here and say when they saw the recruit card come up or even the build card come up, both of those cards are actually considered capital actions. And because of that, on my actually before my turn came around, which it is right now, I could have said I want to simultaneously with that faction I'm choosing to do the same action with, use a serf, which is this guy, these guys with the poles, not this guy, he's a warrior. I can use a serf, and I'd put it on the exact same action that I'm following from another faction at the same time, and then I would just do it in real time at that point in time. You don't wait until your turn, all that kind of stuff. You do it in that moment. So I could basically go, I want to build, or I could have chose to recruit. Now, I didn't do that, but that's where the strategy comes in, because you have to decide, do I need serfs to basically help me to expand by getting those serfs out of my capital city into the land to gather resources and do other things to even help with battles and fighting? Or do I keep them in my courtyard to be able to try to follow actions to build things up in terms of building a little bit of an engine? So it kind of gets interesting, because the more serfs that you take out of your courtyard, the less options that you're going to have going forward. So just before we go ahead and take my turn, I want to mention one other thing, strategy-wise. I do have a spell card. This was given to me, I gave it to myself at the beginning of the game, and basically it's the only spell card in the game because solo factions do not get them. I get them, however. And the cool thing about these particular spell cards is that they can be useful in combat, they can be useful as counters, they can be cast, which means if they're cast keyword, they can actually land over here if you decide to scribe them as part of a research capital action. So there's certain things to do there that are interesting. Now you'll also notice here that there's 3 spots for spells. So of course you can actually spend them straight out of your hand, and you're only allowed to have as many spells in your hand as you have capital city height, essentially. So I'm in tier 1, so I can only have 1 spell card in hand. However, if I choose to do a research action, I choose to scribe a card, as long as it's not a combat, so I couldn't scribe this one, but if I had a cast ability on or keyword on this card, I could actually scribe it into this space right here. And as the tiers go up of my city, I can scribe more and more spells, and it just makes me more powerful, essentially, going forward. And these spells can be reused, and that's really powerful. This particular one's going to be only useful to me in combat. It's going to cost me resources to use it. I do get a victory point for using it, and so it's going to cost me 3 mana. It would give me 1 victory point. I can use it in combat. It says on it you can't scribe it, so what I just described to you is I cannot scribe it into here. If you use a card from your hand, in other words, you just choose to cast it or you use it during combat, in this case I'm using it for combat, you just lose it. The bonus of scribing it, as I mentioned, is so that it's permanently in your area and you get to keep it for later use. That's the cool thing about scribing. But you can only do it once per tier of your capital city. So this advantage here in combat would say when defending, before tactic cards are chosen, you gain 3. That's really good in strength-wise, so that's a really good card. I'm going to hold on to that, of course, so I'll just put that right here for now so I don't forget I have it. At the end of every round, which means when I've used all of my actions and all the enemies have gone 3 cards for all their heroes, then I draw another spell card, and at that point I have to either keep this one and toss the new one, or keep the new one and toss the old one, because I can still only hold 1 in my hand. So that's another bonus for scribing, if I ever get ones that can be scribed, not this one. So moving on from that, we have to make up our mind on what action we want to take using one of the 2 action markers above. All right, I think I know what I want to do. Not only is there following actions over here, something to keep in mind too is there's a muster. So these are considered command actions. If you use a serf to make a second command action, you can go ahead and do that. So basically I can choose to do an action and then use a serf to do a second action if I want to. But remember, when you're using serfs up, they basically are out of play or out of use. Not only in your capital city region for strength, but they're also out of use until the end of the round. They can come back into your courtyard again for future use. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose to march. I'm going to have my warrior take one of the serfs out of the courtyard. And we're going to leave, actually. We're going to leave from our capital city. The question is, where do we go? Well, resource-wise, we have 2 across the board. I'm kind of gunning to get a little bit more ore. I'm a little scared of the dwarves getting all that ore, and I think it'd be good to get myself some. So I'm going to have myself go over here. We're going to head up so we can start trying to protect these areas, because I think these are some focal points where potentially the orcs can come in across the water and the dwarves can come down from the north. So I'm going to have my elves here land in this space. They've moved to this location. I'm choosing to stop their movement here. And again, when I move, I can move up to 5 units as a group. So I've chosen to move these 2 guys together, and I've landed here and I've stopped my movement. The serf essentially takes this spot, or this circle space here. So that means I'm going to get double the resources at the end of the round, and I get to flip this token because I ended my turn here. So I flip it over, and I get to gain whatever it is on here, if it's good. And it was good. I actually gained an ore and a mana. So right away, I'm going to go ahead and bump up my ore and mana. And that's fantastic, because that's going to give me some options here, maybe going into this next turn for the orcs. Just before we move to the orcs turn, I want to make mention of the fact of marching and how that works in terms of speed and how far you can go. I didn't actually mention the movement speed. Now, I do have a warrior here and I have a serf. You can only move when you're moving a group like this, which is up to 5 different units. I got 2 here, so that's legal, up to 5. You're going to take your slowest unit's movement speed, and that's how far you can move as a group. So I have a serf here, and I have a warrior, which means my serf is my lowest speed unit, because it's a 2, and my warrior could move 3. So basically the serf is slowing the warrior down, so it can only go 2 spaces. Now, I only chose to go to here. I could have easily gone to here, but I just wanted to go and sit here for a turn because I really want to ramp up my ore production. At least that's what I was planning to do. All right, we're over here with our friendly orcs. No, they're not friendly at all. They're the worst thing we could possibly imagine. And they're going to go ahead and they're going to build on their capital city track. Wonderful. So the enemy pays 2 of their ore, yes, that's ore, to advance its capital city's token 1 level. So it's very similar to what happened with the dwarves. Now the question is right here, I do have a serf available, and this is the first time that I'm thinking about potentially doing it, because I wanted to avoid it in the first round to show you guys kind of how it plays without follow actions. But at this point, it's a capital action. I could use that serf, I could move this serf to this build spot, and I could follow this build action. And with the amount of resources I have, it might be worth it. So if I choose to follow here, the 3 things that I could do as build actions is 1, I could try to build a tower. The second thing is I could potentially try to build my capital city up, but as you can see, the amount of resources required to do that is quite high, and I don't have it yet. I don't have 4 ore, 4 mana, and 4 food, no way. And then for towers, there's a strategy there in building towers. Yes, I could build a tower here potentially, but the logic in the towers essentially is that they are basically considered adjacent to your courtyards. So if I build a tower next to it, it's kind of defeating the purpose of being able to get my units from one side of the board to the other quickly. If I built a tower over here, say, I could actually move units and have them come out of the tower from my actual courtyard, which would be really powerful. It gets me across the board really fast, saves me lots of turns. So building a tower here really doesn't make much sense. The only other thing I can do is actually upgrade my individual spots within my actual city. So I can build a garrison or a mana tower or a shadow guild, and they unlock based on which tier you're in. So I'm in tier 1 of capital city. So if I built here by using a serf here, and I decide to build the garrison, I'd gain warriors gain an extra strength when battling in the forest region. Or if I wanted the mana tower, I'd gain this ability and that type of thing. So there's all these different abilities for my elves, and I guess I have to make my mind up as to whether I want to spend the serf on that. All right, so I got to make my mind up here as to what I want to do, and I am going to actually follow. So I'm going to follow, and I'm going to do that and use that build action that the orcs just got, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to build myself a sea dock. Now, in order to do that, I have to use a serf in this particular section, and when I do that build action, I don't get this serf back. That one will not come back to the courtyard. It's only the ones that are used up here. So this serf is going to go in here, and it's now locked in there forever. And because I went ahead and upgraded the sea dock, I get the tier 1, because my capital city is only at tier 1 at this point, so I get this row, but only the ones that I've unlocked, which is the sea dock. So I get this ability right here. It says the Corsair collects 2 mana if in a sea region. In a sea region. So this boat right here, my wonderful elven boat that looks so absolutely beautiful, is going to eventually get in the ocean. Once I create the thing, it'll cost 2 food and 2 ore in order to do so. When I do that, which I could actually do on a future turn here, hopefully, then I get the boat into the water, and when boats come in, they're actually considered docked, so they're not in the water, but then later on, if I actually undock my boat and start moving, then I could start gaining from that particular sea dock, which would be pretty cool. So it does say if it's in a sea region. I guess it doesn't say that it has to be docked or undocked. So maybe, yeah, I guess it is a sea dock that I opened up, so technically maybe it's fine to just, yeah, I would imagine I can gain those resources regardless. So that's pretty cool. I'm okay with that, and that's going to be my follow action. So that just required 1 serf, which I had. So we're going to come over here to the orcs. Now the orcs actually have to go ahead now and pay in order to upgrade. They're going to continue doing this build action, so they're going to pay 2 ore in order to go ahead and upgrade their capital city. So what does that do for them? Well, they're going to go ahead and later on get 3 victory points for that. They're also going to have a stronger capital city overall at 6, and orc armies are now +1 when attacking. So they're even stronger, which is nasty. So they're beefing themselves up. So that's going to be it for the build action for the orcs. And now we're going to move over to the dwarves. All right, time to find out what the dwarves are going to do. What are they going to do? They are going to attack. Okay, so this enemy hero and its army move up to 2 to attack the nearest player army that is less than or equal to its natural strength. Gain 1 victory point for battling. Well, this is going to be an automatic fail. First off, because all of the heroes that are talking, well, I guess in this case is talking about the priestess. So the priestess right here in the courtyard technically is inside this capital city, and if they move away, they can't get close enough to anybody to fight. And they would be, it says move an army up to 2 to attack the nearest player, so in any direction. Right now, technically, the only thing they could do is go to here, and they could go across the river to here, it wouldn't do anything. They are not advancing to attack, so that's a failed action. So because this is our first failed action, it says if there are no player armies nearby or the player armies nearby are too strong, then it's failing. And then you're going to go ahead and you're going to move the army now. So when you're moving an army, technically it's not going to be an army yet because the only people we have are heroes, so it's really just going to be the priestess that moves, and it's going to move in the direction of the compass. So the compass is saying it's going to move north. So that's going to have the priestess here come out of this particular capital city region and go to this region up here. When she lands there, she instantly gains this token. Now, the interesting thing about playing a solo faction is it doesn't flip over. You don't get to look at it when you're playing solo. This counts for victory points for the solo faction. So this is actually going to go over to what is considered the collected exploration tokens, and they account for a single bonus point for each token at the end of the game. So this is going to become a giant pile. And really what they're doing with these failed actions is they're going to start running around the board and collecting all these tokens as much as possible to gain a ton of points. So we're going to try to stop that. That's going to be, it's kind of a little bit of the strategy in it. You can let them go, but at the same time, you can also end up losing a whole bunch of points from it. So that's going to pretty much end that action. You can't follow an attack action, even if I had a serf to use. So that's going to end the second turn for are 2 solo-controlled factions. So I have 1 action left to spend, and this is where I want to talk a little bit about the other actions we haven't seen yet. So first off, tax. Taxing basically is coming from this over here, and it's basically you taxing the land or the continent or controlled areas that you own in order to gain resources. So for me, if I chose to tax, I can choose to tax any one of the 3 resources. I only get to pick 1, and I get to gain it based on the number beside it. So if I really wanted food, I only get 2. If I wanted to go after mana, then I would go ahead and get 4, or if I wanted ore, I get 3. Once that's done, no matter which one I pick, and then of course, if we were playing with other players, the solo players will not follow you, but other players, that could be followed, but in solo play, it's not followable. Is that a word? I don't know. Then everything cycles, so then everything moves along the track like this, and things progress. So that's essentially the tax action that I could take in order to basically tax the land to get some resources really quick, and that resides over here in the capital actions. Research, which is right beside it, allows me 2 things. One is I can go to this stack of spell cards, I can pull 3 cards, keep 1, or take 1 out, essentially right now, 1 to keep. Now, my limit in hand is 1, so I don't think I'd do that because I really like the shield, so it doesn't seem like a good idea right now. The other thing you can do if you do a research action is you can scribe, but I cannot scribe this. It even says it right on the card. We talked about that way earlier. The other thing I can do is build. We already talked about building. That's like towers, building up your city, so putting serfs into these particular regions. I can't do that because I don't have any serfs to do that. And then recruiting, something I could do. So recruiting gets interesting because you're talking about recruiting down here. So you got serfs, warriors, commanders, sorcerers. This is where my heroes can finally get into play. And it shows how much they actually cost. So you got 3 food, you got, all the different resources are all shown here. So the assassin is really, well, he must be a very hungry individual if he needs 5 food. But I can't get the assassin out yet. And he moves super fast at 4, and then he's got an attack of 2, or a strength of 2. Sorceress is more even, but 3 food, and then 2 mana. I'm trying to think here, I guess, could I get, no, I couldn't get that one either. So the only one I can actually afford right now is the commander, I think. No, I can't even afford the commander. So really, I could just afford like a warrior, I guess. I could bring a warrior into play. That might not be a bad idea because it gives me some cheap strength. The other thing I really want to do is I really like this a lot. See that right there? Serfs. If you recruit with 3 food, you get 2 serfs. It's almost like a better deal than going for the 1 food to 1 serf ratio. So I'm really trying to save for that. The problem is right now I don't have the food I need to get that. And the problem is I'm not even going to be able to get that on the end of this round here. I'm going to be gathering resources that are going to be ore. That's not going to help me in a mountainous region in order to get the 3 food I need. So yikes, I might have to do some, this is where things get tough. It's like, what action do I want to take? Now I could march again as my second action, and I could get my serf into the plains area, potentially. That might not actually be a bad idea. Let's do that. It wasn't exactly my plan originally, but let's do another march action. We're going to have both of these guys go together to here. The good news is now I'll be gaining food, which is what I really want to start recruiting more serfs back in the capital city. Plus, I get to take this token, and I get to reveal it right now. I don't know what that is, but it doesn't look good. So whenever you get something like this and you're not familiar with exactly what that particular token does, there's a really handy reference sheet in the game. And I'll show you guys that sheet right now. And you just basically take a look at it and try to find it where it is. And in my case, it is a rogue. So a hooded figure approaches from the darkness and offers to spy on your foe for a prize. His shifty demeanor convinces you it would be unwise to refuse him. Immediately pay 1 or to look at 1 spell card from a player's spell library. If you don't pay, lose 1 unit in this region. Oh, okay, well, it's not going to matter because there's no spell cards on the other player, but I still have to pay the ore in order to avoid losing a unit. So because I'm playing solo, like that would be a very, very useful thing to have against another player because you can find out what they have. They're kind of spying on your card, but I don't want to lose a unit in the region at all. So I'm going to go ahead and have to suffer the consequences of my actions and drop this down to 2, pay the guy off so he doesn't hurt one of my units in there. So that really didn't pan out all that well, and now this token's going to get moved over to the side. So that didn't really work out in terms of the token, but at least it worked out in terms of position. I'm in a better position, I think, here. I like this a little bit better, so I'll leave it like that for now, and that's going to end my turn. We're going to go right back to the orcs. All right, so time to find out what the orcs are doing, or at least what Berserker is doing. So the Berserker here is, let's see, it's recruiting. The enemy pays resources to recruit a unit. The priority order is air vessel first. So we do have the air vessel in play, so can't be building that. Sea vessel. Do we have the ability to create the sea vessel? That would be the crocodile. So it would be 2 food and 2 ore. We're at 1s all the way around, so that can't happen. Can we recruit a warrior? A warrior is 2 food. No, we cannot. Can we recruit a serf? Yes, we can. So the very bare minimum there. So we got the serf. So the new unit, is placed in the region with the enemy hero. If it cannot be placed there, it's placed in the capital city. So we do successfully do that recruitment. Can't follow it because I don't have any serfs. It is a capital action, so it could have been followed if I had a serf available. I do have to pay the cost of this, and now that I've paid that cost, I'm going to pull a serf in, which looks like this for the orcs. And I'll see if I can get this to focus for you guys. Doesn't want to. There we go. And this guy is going to go up into this area right here because that's where all my heroes are. It would go wherever the Berserker is. The Berserker is just in the capital city anyway. So once we get a movement going here, depending on who gets that movement, this individual, whoever's with a hero that gets a card that involves a failed action that involves moving, is going to take an army with them. And that's going to be the cool part, is like that could end up going, that could be potentially jumping into this airship and soaring across the board. We don't know where it goes, but it moves 2 spaces in speed, which is very fast. We know that because it says right here that it moves 2 movements, so that's crazy. So we've already done all 3 actions here. We successfully did it, so we're done. Time to find out what our friends the dwarves are going to do to us. I'm really not looking forward to this. Okay, research. So again, actually this is something I can mention earlier on, is that it'll actually show you if it's a capital action just from the fact it'll say player may follow, so just so you know that. The enemy pays mana and casts this enemy hero's spell in the spell book, earning its point value. Okay, so this is going to be pretty straightforward. So basically this is the particular, it's a marauder actually, if you can't see that. So the marauder is going to be the one that's going to be doing this research action, which is going to tie back to its spell. You can see up here there's a hero's spell book, and each of the heroes has its own spell. This is the spell for the marauder, so it's called Metal Thirst. It says steal 3 ore from an opponent. Now it doesn't say which opponent to steal from, so I'm going to be flipping a coin for this because I'm not going to choose it to be me, because we have another solo faction here that's being controlled that could potentially get hit. The marauder has to be able to pay the mana cost though, and can at 3, sadly. So he's going to get 2 points on the track, so I might as well just go ahead and do that for them now. So they are the red dwarves, so this is something you want to do right away. Some of this stuff is point-wise is tracked at the end of the game, like a lot of this stuff in terms of how many, if you have a war croc in play, if you have, how far up your capital city track are you, those types of things are all well and good, but some of this point value or keeping track of score is really important for one-off point values. So when you cast a spell, you get points, and you really need to start tracking this right away because you're not going to be able to remember to track that later. Things like this you can easily track later because you've got a pile of tokens that are each worth 1. So the dwarves have already jumped up to a 2-point lead to start. They're going to cast a spell, which I don't know who's going to hit yet. So in order to determine who's going to get hit, we're going to go ahead and we're going to take a coin. I'm going to take the star side, and we're going to have the orcs take the 5 side. This is straight from Scythe, so there you go. And that's me. That's too bad. I don't know. That was probably the worst flip ever. I think I just flipped it straight up and down. So the good... Oh, that's bad. So the poor elves are losing all of their ore. Thanks a lot to the marauder who just hit them. And that's something I can't follow because I don't have a surf. So I can't do a research action as well, which would be, for me, very different. Again, as I mentioned, it would be grabbing 3 spells and picking one to keep, or it would be scribing something, but it's useless to me, and I don't have a surf to follow. So that is going to actually end everything, because I've used both of my actions on my side, and over here we filled up all of the cards. So how it works now is we're going to go ahead and do our collection of resources. All right, so now we're going to move into the collection of resources phase. Now, just before we do this, the best thing to do is to come over to your group of solo controlled players, take all the cards away and just put them off to the side. Remember, you're not going to shuffle this deck yet until it's down to 1 card. So those ones have already been used up. So we're going to do the same for this one. Take these 3 cards away, put them underneath. The next thing we're going to do is collect resources for the 2 factions. So first off, for the orcs, they're getting nothing. Everybody's inside the capital city, and the capital city does not give resources. So that's great, because it's going to keep all the resources way down the dumps. That's fantastic. All right, moving into the dwarven faction for collecting resources. The first thing I want to make mention of is I made a mistake. When the hero, the priestess, left this particular capital city and went to this location, heroes from in the solo play, as soon as they move into a region that can potentially give them a resource and they stop, they gain that resource. So I should have given that particular faction a mana at that point. Also, right now, they technically also control this region, so they'll gain another mana, so they're now at this. The good thing is, it was so low on the track, it didn't change gameplay at all, luckily. But those are the types of small little things that you can kind of forget when you're going through it. Now, we already covered the orcs. They got absolutely nothing, which is fantastic. So we're going to move over to myself to see what kind of resources I get. So when it comes to my faction, it's all based on where my characters are. Again, I don't have any heroes in play, but I do have a serf and a warrior over here. So first off, for controlling the region, I'm going to gain 1 food, which is fantastic. So this is going to bump me up to 3. And because I have a serf in this location, I gain double that resource, or an extra resource, not double. So this is going to move the food up to 4, which is awesome because it's getting me into the zone of being able to do that wonderful 3 for 2 on getting or recruiting serfs, which I really want to do and gain some more of them. So I'm doing quite well, although, again, my ore is struggling thanks to that insane attack. The other thing you do in this particular phase for the human character like myself is you're going to go and you're going to draw a new spell card. And I can only have 1 card in my hand, but I can look at this and I can decide which of these 2 I think is better. So this one is considered an interrupt spell, and it's called a halt spell. So for 2 mana, I can gain a point by using this to interrupt. It can't be scribed, so I can only just use it once and it's discarded. Stop an enemy spell and return it to their library. That spell cannot be cast again this turn. That player still pays, So this is an interrupt that actually, well, it's actually not that bad. Stop an enemy spell and return it to their library. So this could actually interrupt or stop one of the nasty spells that would have hit me that time. So this could be good. It could be really good. Now, the question is it better than having the shield? It's cheaper to use, but this one says, when defending before tactic cards are chosen, gain 3 in the battle. That's really powerful. I think I'm going to let this one go. I think shield's really good. An extra 3 is almost like having, like a sorceress in play for me. So that's huge. I'm going to keep that. So that's what I'm going to do for my turn. And now we're all set for the next round. Lastly, I'm just going to return my actions out of the spaces that they were chosen for. If I had any serfs that happen to be in any of these capital action spaces or up here anywhere, I could bring them back into the courtyard. This one, though, is stuck because I used this serf to create the sea dock and will not be coming back into my courtyard. So everything's squared away and we're ready to go into the next turn. But we're going to stop right there because this video covered a ton of information. Now, we didn't gain that far into the gameplay, but that's because we're really just setting up the basis of how this game flows. Now, going forward, things are going to start to speed up. I'm going to start explaining less things, and I'm only going to start explaining things that are new to you, but I'm going to be moving through this at a quicker clip. So this video is a little bit longer than normal, but I wanted to kind of sum up a lot of what happens in the solo play so that there's a good general understanding and that we can kind of build on that as we go. So hopefully you guys are interested in seeing this playthrough go, because I think this is going to get wild and crazy really fast. I'm doing my best here to try to get myself positioned for what likely will be quite quite a clash of a battle when we eventually get to it. So thank you so much for your support. If you saw anything I missed up to this point, let me know in the comments below. I'll do my best to fix it for the next video. Appreciate all the support. And again, this Kickstarter, Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea is in for a reprint right now, and I think still has 5 to 6 days as of this recording left in its campaign. I am having an actual blast with this, so I really am enjoying this one, and I would highly endorse it. I've played it quite a few times off-camera solo now, and I really do like it. They've done a really good job of implementing solo, and it's not stagnant. It feels really, really active and alive, and there's a lot of strategy involved in what the heck you should do to combat all these different factions. And the cool thing is the scaling. I like that. I like the fact that you can have just, you know, one faction against yourself. You can fill the whole board and have 3 other factions going against you. Like, that's madness. I do like the streamlined quality of the cards here, and that their actions are quite quick. It's either a pass or fail type resolution. Once you get the hang of some of the rules, which we'll talk more about as we go into further parts of the playthrough, you'll kind of see how it flows and how really easy it is to control multiple factions. So thank you again for watching. I hope it helps, and I'll see you in the next episode. As always, keep on rolling solo.